Brilliant. So that's now recording. We've still got a few people coming. Yes, so there's lots to get through. Like I say, if you'd like to try and make along, that's great. But the worst thing to happen is for you to get all like, oh, I'm not catching up. I'm, kind of get your knickers in a twist. So don't worry. If that happens, just put it down, sit back, keep watching, and then you can watch back the recording in your own time. It would be really handy for me to know, first of all, if you want to pop in the chat, if you have got, let me open the chat so I can see. Oh, I can see you're already chatting. Oh, that's so great. Yep, so you're going to get the recording. That's all good. So it'd be really handy for me to know. Oh, Jacob, first time out of the box. That is mega exciting. Don't worry, we're going to get you sewing in no time. So actually, maybe first of all, you could put, if this is your first time using a sewing machine, maybe if you could put that in the chat, and then it gives me a sort of a vague idea of how many newbies we're talking to. Brilliant. Saffron, don't worry. Hayley, that's great. Don't you worry, you're going to be fine. And Lindsay. Okay, quite a few of you first time. Oh my gosh. Makes it even more exciting. And do you know what? So was that Dawn? So, and a few people saying not sewn since school. We have so many people like that in the workshops that we run. So usually it's people who've either never sewn or haven't sewn since school, and then it's a bit like, oh my gosh, all of that information in my brain isn't there anymore. So don't worry, you're not alone. Oh, great. Right. Okay. We've got quite a few newbies. That's brilliant. It's also handy for me to know. So I think because this is a workshop which I've done with the Crafting Outlet and Singer Outlet, it'd be handy for me to know which machine type you've got. So if you've got a Singer or whatever make of machine, could you pop your make of machine into the chat so that I can see? Okay, we've got lots of Singers. The heavy duty, that's a cracking machine, that one. Well, quite a few of these. Oh, Bernette, that's lovely. Lots of Singers. Great. So I think probably quite a few of you have come through Singer Outlet website. Okay, Brill. Thank you. That's great. Yeah, keep popping them in. That's fine. I'll look back on them afterwards. Okay, brilliant. Right, I'm going to get cracking. So first of all, let me tell you what we're going to go through. I'm going to tell you there's loads to get through, so I will be quite speedy. If you have questions, you're very welcome to unmute yourself and say it if it's really urgent, but it probably is something that I'm going to get to, and it's easier for me to kind of keep track of what I'm doing if you can just pop it in the chat. Or you could raise your hand. Exactly. Thank you. That's lovely. Thank you for saying that. Raise your hand and I'll try and get to you when I can, like it's an opportune moment, just so that I can kind of keep the flow and try and keep everything in and on track. At the end, I'll try and keep room to do a bit of a Q&A. So if there's anything that I've not answered, you're always very welcome to answer it there, to ask it there, and I'll answer it for you. And I'm going to send you an email after this session, and it'll have all of my contact details on it. So if there is anything else that I've not answered and I'm able to answer it for you, you're always very, very welcome to drop me a line and I'll get back to you that way as well, or follow me on social media. Put that in there. Okay, so what I'm going to do is firstly go through kind of basic kit, so cover anything else that I think you might need or might be useful to you to kind of enhance your sewing life. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about fabric, the types of fabrics that are easier to use and the types of fabrics maybe to avoid as a beginner. Then we'll do a little bit on pinning and ironing, because those techniques are really important. And there are lots of hints and tips that I can share with you that will make your life just a little bit easier as you're making any kind of sewing projects. Then we'll go through your machine. So the basic functionality of the machines is all going to be roughly the same. So don't worry if yours doesn't look like the brother that I've got here. That's okay. And then we'll have a little bit of a practice. And then we're going to make, oh, I've got more people in the waiting room. Gosh, there's lots of you here today. How exciting. There we go. Sorry, I'll try and minimize that kind of interlude. We're going to make a cushion cover, so that's exciting. Honestly, you will not believe it. You'll be so proud of yourselves, and I'll be so proud of you when you've made it. It's going to be great. And then at the very end, I'll do a quick bit of troubleshooting and answer any questions that you've got. Okay, so let's get cracking. So basic kit, obviously you've all got your sewing machines, but there are a few things that it's really great to have in your kit that will help you. First of all, a really great pair of fabric scissors, and you need to be really, really like fiercely protective of these and not let anybody else use them for cutting paper or anything else, because it'll blunt them really easily. You just want to keep them for fabric only. I am really quite, if any of my family are seen with anything else, then honestly, well, they just never are, because they know how annoyed I'd be. So a pair of those is really useful. Also a little pair of embroidery scissors just for snipping things like your loose threads and bits and bobs like that. Threads, it's great to have a basic selection of threads. Crafting Outlet and Singer Outlet do some really great selections. So this is one here. The colors that I find most useful are like beiges and kind of grays, because if you don't want to get the full range of colors, they're quite good neutrals that sit fairly well on a range of different colors, unless you're doing a really specific kind of dressmaking project, in which case you want to try and color match as closely as possible. But just starting out, it's great to have a few kind of beiges and grays, darks and lights. Oh, do you mind just muting yourselves, everybody? Let me see if I can quickly do that. Oh, there we go. Done. Yeah, so they're kind of really good neutral colors to have. I keep all of my threads in a little thingy like this, which I find really useful. I think I just got this in Lidl or something once. It's brilliant, but really, really handy. And then I have another bit underneath for your other bits and bobs. I would always get a good quality thread, and at the beginning just get like a sew-all thread. So Gutermann is my favorite brand for thread, that one there, and they do like a sew-all thread, which is really great for any fabrics. So that would be my recommendation to start off with. Oh, sorry, I was going to say something else, but I'll say it later on. That's okay. Okay, we've done scissors. Pins, I always use scissors. These are about 23 centimeter, and Fiskars is my favorite scissor brand. They're just the ones that I've always used, but Janome do quite nice scissors as well. Yeah, but again, it's that all of these things, they will last you a lifetime. So there's good scissors and good pins. They're not going to, if you look after them and you invest well, they'll literally last you, I mean, pretty much a lifetime, a long, long time. So it's really good to get, not scrimp too much. And same with threads. Cheap threads are not good for your machine. It will affect your sewing. And also, I will say the other thing I was going to say earlier. So it's important to have the same thread on the top as the bottom underneath, and then they will flow through your machine nice and smoothly, kind of at the same rate. Whereas if you've got a cheap one, especially in the top or the bottom, it will kind of snap, and it will mean uneven stitching and things like that. So it's good just to do that kind of nicely. I just stick to like Gutermann. If you can sometimes get sets of threads on like a cardboard inner tube, I avoid those. I just don't think they're not very good. You want to have like Silco, Dreamer. There's lots of different makes, but Gutermann is my preferred brand. Pins, I always go for glass-headed pins because they don't melt under the iron. A few instances where I've been pressing seams and I've had plastic pins and they've melted under my iron, and it's not been good for my fabric or my pins or my irons. So yeah, I always use glass-headed pins. And I love my magnetic pin cushion. It's one of my favorite sewing gadgets, because if you drop some pins or whatever, you literally just kind of, do that. There we go. Oh, that was easy. It's great. All of these things I've made you like a handbook, instruction handbook, and I have listed all of these things just so that you know in the handbook. So I'm going to send you a list with links to my favorite ones. There's no I don't get commission or anything. It's genuinely my favorite ones that I'm going to share with you at the end of this. So don't worry too much about trying to note down all of that sort of thing that I'm saying. It's great to have some replacement sewing machine needles, because you should replace them probably more than you think about it. You get some with your sewing machine. So you're fine for a little bit. And then the other thing is, a seam ripper, which I think you should probably all get with your sewing machine as well. But it's really great to have a nice sharp, you can see it against my jumper, seam ripper, just for whenever we make any mistakes, and we all do. It's infrequent for me to make something and not undo at least one little bit of stitching after having stitched hundreds and perhaps even thousands of different projects. So please never worry. I always think, imagine you're typing and then you hit delete and you don't even think about it. You just hit delete. Oh, I did a bit that wrong then. Never mind, it doesn't matter. But you get a bit, if you have to unpick a bit of stitching, you're like, oh no, I did it wrong. Doesn't matter. Just unpick it, do it again. No one will ever know. So honestly, don't worry. Okay, so that is kind of basic kit stuff. Like I say, that's all in the instruction manually thing that I've made for you, so don't worry about that. Fabrics, so your life will be much easier if you start off with projects at the beginning. Basically, I think kind of medium weight cottons or linens, actually, this is a cotton linen mix, are the easiest types of fabrics to work with. So these are woven fabrics, first of all. So that means they have threads going from left to right and from top to bottom. So they're not knitted fabrics. There's no stretch. If I was to pull this across or up and down, there's no or very, very little stretch, because the threads are a straight line going up and down and left and right, and you can't stretch a straight line. So those sorts of fabrics are much easier to sew with at the very beginning. Stretch fabrics and jerseys are where the threads go wiggly all the way along, so when you pull them they can stretch because they're all wiggly, so you can pull them like that. They're much trickier. They're not much trickier, but they are definitely trickier to sew with. They don't behave as nicely, whereas cottons and linens like this that are kind of a medium weight, so like a chambray cotton or like just a medium weight patchworky type cotton, or this nice lightweight linen, they behave really well. They don't slip and slide on top of each other. When you cut them, you can cut out your shapes quite nicely without it slipping around. So it's just much easier to get good results if you use a fabric like that. If you want to, I really love gingham. And gingham is a really great fabric to use if you're a beginner, because it's got a woven stripe in it, going both ways. So these stripes aren't printed on, they're woven on. So if you want to find a straight line, you can just follow the line of the pattern, which is really brilliant if you're a beginner, because it means you don't have to try and guess. The direction of those threads that are going left to right and top to bottom are called the grain of the fabric. So you'll see, all of this is in the handout, so don't worry, but you'll hear about grain, and if you get a bit more, when you get a bit more advanced and you're making more things using patterns, you'll see a grain line on a pattern piece. So that's a line with an arrow at each end. And that grain line always needs to follow the direction, the grain of the fabric, the threads on the fabric, so this way or this way. And actually, when you're cutting anything out, if you imagine if I was to cut out a skirt or something, and the fabric, I kind of cut it out on the slosh, if I was to wear that skirt, it just wouldn't sit properly on me. It would kind of twist around, and it wouldn't be right. So it's really important to cut out your fabric pieces in line with the grain of the fabric. And that goes for a cushion even as well, actually. Oh, I think we've had someone else come in. Hang on a mo, let's just see. Oh, how do I do that? Admit, there we go. Jacob. Yeah, so even with the cushion, it's important to cut out your rectangle. Literally, you can see I've done it with the gingham. It shows you quite nicely along with the grain of the fabric. I think, did somebody just ask about, where's my chat gone? Might have just asked, sorry, here's the chat. rotary cutter. I saw that, Janice. I love using a rotary cutter, Janice. It is brilliant. I use it all the time. I used it today to cut out this fabric. This is a rotary cutter. If you're comfortable with one and you've used one before, you can use one with fabric. You need a cutting mat and a proper ruler as well, like a quilting ruler, like this sort of thing here. But if you're a newbie, just use your scissors. I have actually got a patchwork workshop up on my website. I'll tell you about those a bit later, where I show you how to use that in a bit more detail. But yeah, I love my rotary cutter. Okay, so that's fabrics. So if you are kind of making along, or you want to make along straight afterwards, you can, or maybe you have already, as per the instructions, cut out a rectangle of fabric which is 102 centimeters by 43 centimeters, which is in line with the grain of the fabric. If you're unsure of the grain of the fabric, there are a couple of ways to check. So firstly, as a fabric is woven, the threads that you have, the warp threads going top to bottom, and then the weft threads get woven left, right. And so what they create are two kind of naturally neatened finished edges down either of the left and the right hand sides of the fabric. They're called the selvages, and they are always in a nice straight line that goes in line with the grain of the fabric. So if you can see a selvage, you're like, right, that's a straight line. I'll follow that line in order to get the straight grain of my fabric. And then the other way is, if you've got a fabric which is where you can't necessarily tell, what you can do is right on the edge of the fabric, I might be able to show you on this one, you can find one thread and just pull that one. You can only do this if it's quite a quite thick fabric weave, so you can't do it if it's a really fine cotton, but you can just get one of the threads, pull it slightly, and that will kind of offset that thread down the length of the fabric slightly, and then that line of that thread will be in a nice straight line in line with the grain as well. So that's another way of doing that. Okay, so that's fabrics and that's kit. Pinning. Okay, I'm going to show you how my preferred way of pinning, with step one of doing the cushion cover. So if you are making along, you can join me on this step. I have got an overhead camera, but actually I think I might just do this. Let's see, hang on a moment. Switch to my overhead camera and see how it's behaving. It's a bit upside down. Let's see. It might be all right. Okay, I think that's okay. Right, although it's kind of back to front. Hang on. See if I can go. No, I might try and change that in a minute, but for now I'm going to do it this way. So I want everything to be the right way around for you. Okay, so I've got my fabric. For this gingham, there's no right side or wrong side. But if you do have a right side and a wrong side, you want to place the fabric in front of you with the wrong side facing up. And then what we're going to do is fold a double 1.5 centimeter hem at each of the short ends. So at this end here, go all the way along, and also this end here. So the way that I pin is I have my fabric in front of me with the bulk of the fabric to my left, and then I always have the points of the pins facing away from me. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to measure so we need to do double 1.5 centimeters. So if you fold over and measure that fold and make sure that that fold is 1.5 centimeters, which is beautifully up to that light white line there on my fabric. And then you can fold again the same amount like that, so that I know that I folded it over 1.5 centimeters once and then 1.5 centimeters twice. And then I have the bulk of the fabric on my left, and I put the pin in with the point going away from me like this. And I'm doing that along the same direction of the line that I'm going to be stitching in. You might see some people, and there's nothing wrong with this, well, you might see some people putting their pins in perpendicular to the line of stitching like this, and then they just sew straight over the pins. I don't like doing that for two reasons. So firstly, there is a chance that your needle on your sewing machine can hit that pin and it can snap. I hate it when that happens. It's quite dramatic. It's really horrible. So I try and avoid doing that. And then also, if you've got kind of quite a few pins and a bit of a curve that you want to sew around, it adds quite a lot of bulk and quite a lot of ridges onto your fabric. So it means it's harder to get a nice, neat finish. Whereas if you put your pins in this way, it means that you can just sew along here, and then just before you get to each pin, you can pull the pins out as you go. And by having them in this direction, you literally just can pull them out. If you had to have them in this direction, of course, you'd get there, and then you'd have to kind of awkwardly try and get in front of your, in between your sewing machine foot and your pin to try and take it out. So it's important to have the bulk of your fabric to the left and points away from you on your pins. It's the sort of thing that just becomes second nature once you've done it a few times, and that's automatically the way that you will find yourself pinning your fabric if you practice. So what we're going to do is go all the way down that end with a double 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. The way that I normally do it is I do maybe one pin at one end, one in the middle and one at the other end. And then I'll show you. So if I do one in the middle here and another one down at this end, what you can do then, once you've got a few in, is between two of those pins, you can just kind of pull it like this, and it will kind of automatically find the right path between those other two pins, so that you can just do that one as well. So there we go. I've put a pin probably every 10 centimeters down here, maybe a bit less actually, maybe about every 8 to 10 centimeters. I don't know how clearly you can see them, but there we go. And then I'm going to do exactly the same on the other end. So turn the fabric around and pin it towards the wrong side by 1.5 centimeters. I'm just going to measure that, and it is much easier having gingham. It's lovely. 1.5 centimeters, and then another 1.5 centimeters. And then pop pins in down this end as well. Yeah, so that's my best tips for pinning. And then I'm not going to do the next step today because of space and time, but what I would usually do after I've pinned is press. And it's really, I hate ironing usually, but when I'm sewing, I really enjoy ironing because it means it's the difference between having a project that looks really professional if you've pressed it as you go, and something which doesn't have, nice crisp seams and things. So if you can have an iron or a mini iron, they do some really amazing mini irons now, handy, and then just press as you go, you'll see a big difference, especially if you're making anything that you're going to wear. If you press as you go. And if you imagine, say you've constructed a sleeve or something, and then you try and get your iron in after you've done the sleeve to all the nooks and crannies and make it nice and neat, that it's much, much harder to get that iron into something that's finished and constructed, rather than doing it as you go step by step, because if you do it one step at a time, you'll have relatively flat seams each time, so you can get a nice smooth finish. Yes, okay, that's pinning and ironing. So, and we've done step one. Fantastic. Okay, so now hope you're all okay. Let me just have a double check on the chat, see if there's anything really urgent that I need to address. Fold over twice in hemming a skirt. Yes, I would. Tanya, doesn't matter if you do it the other way. Sometimes struggle because I'm left-handed. It doesn't matter if you do it the other way. That's just the way that I find easiest and the way that I prefer to teach. But it's not science. You can do it the other way if you prefer. I just want to give you the tips that I think are the most useful. And pins and pattern side down. Exactly right. Oh, I don't think your name is iPad, but you're here as iPad. So pattern side down, yep, you're folding towards the wrong side. And pins and clips, I do use clips sometimes. They look like this. but I tend to use pins more. That's what I've always used. So with clips, you would hold the fabric like this with your clips, and again, you just take them out just before you get to them. Okay, I'm not going to talk about folding seams around a neckline because I've got another workshop for that, and it's not. We'll try and keep things really basic today. Sorry. I can't remember how was that. Okay, so right now I'm going to take you through the sewing machine. So first of all, I'll take you through all of the functions of the sewing machine and tell you all about what each bit does, and then we'll do a threading up and the bobbin, and I'll share some hints and tips with you on that as well. So like I said, don't worry if your machine looks a little bit different to this. Basically, the bits and bobs are kind of in the same place. Try and get a bit of me in as well. Okay, so on the left hand side here, you've got this wheel. It's called the flywheel or the balance wheel, various different names. This wheel will do the same function as you putting your foot down on the pedal, but in real kind of slow motion. You always want to get into the habit of only ever bringing that wheel towards you. If you try and turn the wheel away from you, you're asking the thread to kind of go back up through the machine the way it came. It will get really upset about it and it will get knotted. So only ever bring the wheel towards you, because that means you're sewing in the right direction. But it's really, really useful to use the balance wheel when you're beginning sewing. What I tend to do at the beginning of every single line of stitching that I do is I will do the first couple of stitches manually by bringing the wheel towards me. You can probably see the needle over here is going up and down as I do that. Oh, we've got another person come. Yeah, but by doing it manually with the wheel, it means that you have complete control over where the needle is going down into the fabric, what direction you're headed in, and the speed that you're going in as well. So it's really useful. And also, actually, sometimes if I'm going around a really fiddly corner or curve and I've got perhaps quite a few layers of fabric or something, I will take my foot off the pedal and I will just do a bit of manual sewing by bringing the wheel towards me then as well. So it's really useful to use that. Up here, we've got this, you might have two. I've got one on this machine. This is what the spool of thread goes onto. Here we go, there's one here. So that's the top thread. Like I said before, it's really, really important to have the same thread on the top, on the spool and on the bobbin on your machine. We'll talk about the bobbin a bit later, but that's where that goes, up here. Oh, got another person coming in. Yeah, so you might need to put that down for storage or bring it up here. This is the bobbin winder. I'll show you about that in a little bit. Then basically, let me go around the machine. We'll do threading in a minute. Reverse is usually somewhere around here, and it's usually got a little picture of it, an arrow going up and down. So reverse is really, really handy. So I use that. So like I said to you, at the beginning of any line of stitching, I'll always do it by hand, bringing the wheel towards me. Once I've done 2 or 3 stitches towards me, I'll just put my foot down on the pedal, but hold that reverse button. Sometimes it's over here actually. And with your finger on that reverse button, it means you'll do a few stitches backwards. So you'll go back over the few stitches that you've done. And that is the most effective and quickest way of tying a knot, securing your stitching to make sure that it doesn't come undone. And the last thing you want to do is sew something beautiful and then your stitching comes undone. So it's really, really important that you secure your stitching at the beginning and at the end of any line of stitching that you do. We'll have a practice of that in a minute, so don't worry about it just yet. Quite a few of you might have a speed control, which is usually up here, which is brilliant. So if you want to, as a beginner, just keep it to the slowest setting, and then you kind of move it, slide it along to make it faster. So that just means when you put your foot down on the pedal, the maximum speed is going to be a lot slower if you have it down at that number 1, rather than having it at the number 3. So that's great for beginners. This here is the tension dial. It's sometimes more like kind of a wheel dial up here, if you've got one of those as well. don't play around with that unless you have to, is my best advice for today's workshop. When you've got your machine, I think most of you have got brand new machines, they will come beautifully calibrated with the tension as it needs to be for sewing the vast majority of fabrics. So you shouldn't need to mess around with that. What that does is it controls the speed at which this spool thread is pulled through the machine. So it means that when that tension is set correctly, your stitching is nice and even. The stitches on the top look the same as they do underneath of your fabric, and everything is kind of, you know, it's all singing from the same song sheets. You shouldn't need to mess around with that as a beginner. The only reason you generally do need to play around with it is if you're using like really super fine, flimsy, floaty fabrics or something that's very, very thick. I'd avoid that at the beginning, so don't worry about it too much. I always find it's a bit tricky. You have to really kind of faff around and play if your tension goes off to get it back to normal again. So if you can avoid messing around with that, try not to. Okay, then if we go down here, actually I'll do this bit up here first. So all over here you should have your stitch selectors. So if you've got a mechanical machine, it won't be screens like this, it will be more like dials. Whoop, there we go, just turn this one on. So you'll have a stitch selector, so you'll have pictures of various different stitches that your machine can do. So you will choose which stitch you would like. They'll have a number next to them if it's mechanical or if it's computerized actually. So you can select your stitch and then you will be able to choose, usually, not always, but usually the width and the length of that stitch as well. For a lot of these, it will automatically be chosen for you, but actually for you guys to start off with, you're probably going to be focusing on just using the straight stitch and the zigzag stitch. So quite often with some of my machines, there are stitches that I never use. I mean, there's loads that you can do with the other stitches. It's brilliant. But at the beginning, don't get too bamboozled by those. Just focus on the straight stitch and the zigzag stitch, which should be the first ones. And with there will be stitch length and stitch width controls that you can control with either buttons or the dials on your machine. If you've got a mechanical machine, the width stitch control will probably be a dial with a picture of a zigzag getting wider or narrower. And then as you move that along, it widens or narrows the stitch, and the stitch length will be probably more like a knob that you turn, and it will have a picture of a straight dashed line getting longer, shorter to longer, and that's how you control the length of your stitch. When we're having a bit of a practice with doing stitching in a minute, I will talk to you a little bit more about those, but that will always be kind of down this section of your sewing machine. Over here you've got the presser foot. This one here, it's just a standard presser foot. They all look like this. There's a hole in the middle, which is what your needle goes down, and then you press it down, you push it down with this lever in here. And then, so that pushes down onto your fabric, it holds it in place, and your needle will go down in the middle. So it means that everything's kind of, you know, in position. Directly underneath the presser foot, oh, I might need to go to my other camera. Let's do it. I'm going to hold it manually and try not to wibble. Okay. So, what's that? Oh, that's annoying. Hang on a mo. What's that? Oh, there, that's that bit. Okay, right. So directly underneath the presser foot, which normally goes on here, but I've just taken it off quickly. You can see these teeth here, and they are the feed dog. And what they do is they grip the underneath of your fabric as you're stitching and as you're sewing through your machine. And so your hand, you'll be kind of responsible for pushing your fabric with your hands through the machine. But on the it's important that the fabric on the top and the bottom goes through your machine at the same rate. So is the sound okay? Somebody just said, oh, I can't. Oh, I'm holding, I'll check the chat in a minute. If you can't, oh, sounds okay for you. Thank you, Sharon. That's very helpful. So these teeth underneath here, as you're sewing, if I move the wheels kind of to sew manually, you'll see that those teeth are moving. And what they do is I'll show you with my hands, they're kind of going like this. And they're pulling the fabric through underneath through the machine like this. So you can do this on the top, and that's doing that job underneath. And it means that your 2 layers of fabric, or however many layers, should go through at the same rate, and your sewing is nice and even. The only other thing I want to draw your attention to is, in terms of parts of the machine at this stage, is this plate here. Oh, sorry, my camera's a bit squiffy. This plate here. And there are some lines on this plate, and they are really useful for you to measure your seam allowance. Don't think you can see them quite. Here's a line here, here, and here. And they have numbers on them, and basically they tell you, those numbers against those lines tell you what your seam allowance is. And the seam allowance is the distance from the edge of your fabric to your stitch line, as long as you've got your needle in the center. So standard seam allowance is 1.5 centimeters, for example. So you would line up the edge of your fabric with the line that says 1.5 on here, and that means that your sewing line would automatically be 1.5 centimeters in from that edge of your fabric. If that's not making complete sense, don't worry, because when we have a practice in a mo, I'll show you that. Yeah, in practice. Okay, so now we're going to do a quick threading up your machine. First of all, we'll do a bobbin, actually. Can I do this back to front? I don't know. Hang on. Sorry. No, I definitely couldn't do it back to front. Actually, I'm going to get a fresh one from over here. And do you know what? I'm going to use hot pink thread, because this coordinating one, you won't be able to see difference. That's okay. Don't worry if you have to go. That's fine. I'll send you the recording. You can catch up. It's fine. Thank you for joining for the bit that you could make anyway. Right. So what we're going to do is, when you buy your threads, they all come in spools like this, but you need to get that thread, or some of that thread, onto a bobbin as well to go down here. So you have your 2 threads that go along, and they kind of link together, and that's what your sewing stitches are. So let me show you how you wind a bobbin. So you need to put your spool thread onto that prong up there, and then you'll have a little circular bit around here. In fact, there's usually a beautiful diagram on modern machines that you can just copy and wind your thread around there so that it goes around that circle, and then back here. Ooh. There we go. And then back here, and this little shorter prong here is the one that your bobbin is going to go onto, and the thread is going to wind from your spool onto your bobbin. But what we need to do is, you'll see in the bobbin that there are some little holes like this. So I'm going to go up through the center of one of those holes. So can you see I've gone up? You might not be able to see. Oh, you kind of can. And then I've gone up through one of those little holes there, from the inside up to the top, like that. So my thread is now going through that hole in my bobbin, or you can see against my jumper quite nicely. So now I'm going to pop the bobbin onto that little prong there. And then what you need to do is push that little prong for the bobbin winder to your right. And then that will engage, it will tell your machine, okay, right, we're winding the bobbin now. That's what we need to do. On some machines, you may also need to pull out your balance wheel to disengage the needle going up and down. But on most modern machines now, you don't need to do that. Okay, so we're going to grip hold of the end of the thread that we put through that hole, and then just pop your foot down on the pedal, and you'll see the thread winding around the bobbin. It's a bit weird doing it back to front. Okay, it's done it a few times now. So now I can snip the end of this one off, and I don't need to hold on to it anymore. And then we can just keep going. And you can keep going. If you want to keep going until the bobbin is full, it will automatically, because the thread on the bobbin will push against this piece here, it will automatically kind of push itself away once it's full up. So it will stop automatically when it's full. If you want to speed up your bobbin winding, then you can just do this. And if you don't want a completely full bobbin, because maybe you haven't got a totally full spool, you can just stop there if you want to. I'm going to stop there because that's fine. So then by moving this back over to the left, that means, okay, we've told our machine that we've stopped winding the bobbin now. If you've got one of the machines which you pull the balance wheel out, you'll just need to push that back in as well. Take the bobbin off and then snip the thread. So that's got the same thread now on the bobbin as it's got on the spool. So we're good to carry on. Okay, so let's thread our machine up. I think I'm going to keep on this camera. Yeah, I am, because you can see everything. I'm just trying to do things back to front, but that's okay. Okay, so on most machines, there should be some nice little helpful illustrated or printed arrows and lines to show you the directions that you need to go in. Let me just put that back to slow. And it's pretty much the same. So you always go across here, underneath. Oh, hang on a sec. I've got to do it slightly. Right. So you can't. I'm going to go. I'm not going around this circle. This circle is just to wind the bobbin, but I'm just going in underneath this first hook here. Can you see that little notch? So I want to go round through that first notch that leads directly to the first kind of gap in your machine that goes downwards, and the thread is going to go through that kind of into that first notch and then directly down here. Where's it gone? Here we are. Like that. And then at the bottom here, this is the same for all your machines, you're going to do a U-turn and come back up again up to this kind of gap in the plastic or metal of your machine up here. Just going to quickly do that so that I can see what I'm doing. So yeah, there's a number 3 here that's going down, and we go back up all the way up to the top up here. Now up here, you should have a little metal kind of bar with a hook on it that you want to keep going in a kind of right to left direction, but you might not see that bar. So at the moment, for me, very helpfully for my demonstration, there's no bar there. So if you grab onto your flywheel, if you can't see a bar up here, and bring it towards you, if you keep your eye over here, you'll see, there we go, it just pops up. I'm going to do it again so you can see it going down and up it pops there. So now this little, it's very hard to show you, this little bit of metal in here, I'm going to go down the right hand side of that bit of metal first of all, and then take it back around the back, and then down the left hand side of that back bit of metal, and then back and down the same direction of this gap that I just came up a moment ago. So that's all you need to do in terms of the threading at the top, apart from the threading of the needle. So we go along, down, U-turn, back up through this bar at the top. If you can't see it, you bring your wheel towards you until you can see it pop up, and then back down again to the bottom. And then when you get to the bottom, you can thread your needle from front to back. You probably all got an automatic needle threader. I don't like them. I mean, I might be in the minority, but I find them an absolute, I just don't like them. So you can use your automatic needle threader if you like to, but I think it's easier just to thread your needle from front to back. There we go, like that. So you have your needle through your threader, and then you will see up here, right at the top of your needle, I will change for this bit so I can show you really clearly. Whoop. So I've threaded my needle from front to back. You see this little metal bar here. I'm going to catch my thread behind that bar, which means that my thread is going to kind of not go flying off in any direction. It kind of keeps it all nice in a nice straight line, and nothing is going to get tangled up. Okay, so we've threaded the machine up, and we've got the needle threaded down here with a nice long tail, and it's for so many reasons. It's actually really important to pull a nice long tail of thread out at the very beginning of any sewing project. If you have a really short tail, something that can quite easily happen is you'll start sewing, and the first thing that happens is kind of all the tension sort of finds its feet, and sometimes that will suck the thread back up into the machine again, so it comes unthreaded, and it's so annoying because you've just taken all that time to thread your machine up. So if you pull a nice long tail, it really eliminates that problem from happening. Okay, so now I'm going to show you the threading of the bobbin. Just try and sort this camera out. Oh, that might be a bit better. Okay, good. Right, there's two different types of bobbin loaders on the machines. This is a top loading bobbin, which is my preferred option. It's a little bit easier, but I'm going to show you this top loader and also the bottom loader as well. Yeah, just I was going to say, tell me if you've got a front loader, but actually there might be people on the recording who need the front loader, so I'm going to show you both. Definitely. And I'm warming up quite nicely in here, so let's turn the heater off. Okay, so for a top loader, you take your bobbin, there should be a little picture of the direction that the thread needs to go. But basically, if you have your bobbin sitting flat on the top of your machine and you pull your thread, the thread wants to come down the left-hand side of your bobbin, so that if you pull the thread, your bobbin will turn in an anti-clockwise direction. So as long as that's the case, have the thread coming down the side to the front like this. Just simply drop it into your bobbin holder like that. There's a I'll show you this first of all. There's a case that a top that goes on there, so you'll need to take that off. Whoop. Doing things from the side, sorry. So there's that case in there. So for these ones, you just literally slide it off like this, drop your bobbin in, and then you need to collect that bottom bobbin thread so that it joins and meets up with your spool thread at the top of your machine. So in order to do that, you hold your spool thread with your left hand, quite tight actually, like just taut. And then with your right hand, you bring that flywheel on the right hand side that is so useful, bring it towards you. So it means it starts sewing, and then you'll keep the tension up with your left hand on that spool thread. And then you'll see that spool thread loop down and go and collect your bobbin thread and bring a loop of it up to the top. So as soon as you see that loop and you've done one stitch, you can just pull the loop. And now we've got both threads on the top of the machine and we're ready to start sewing. So we can pop that bobbin cover back on. The only other thing to do is to make sure that your threads go through that nick in the front of the presser foot and then through the hole in the center, the same hole that your needle's going to go up and down through. And then you're ready to start sewing. It looks really fiddly, and actually it is quite fiddly, but do you know what? Like anything, just practice it. Do it a few times. Once you've done it probably 5 times, you will know exactly what you're doing and it'll be second nature and it will come really easily to you. So don't worry, just have a little practice. Right. Oh, why did I undo that? Oh, it's okay. I'm going to show you quickly the front loader. How are we doing? Time. Oh, we're doing okay. We're doing well. I think we're going to be all right. I just want to make sure I've got enough time to answer any questions at the end as well. Right, I'm going to pop this machine down for one moment. Oh, I love that machine. It's so light. It means it's so easy to use. Whereas this lovely old Bernina beast, which I love, it's really heavy. That makes life a bit trickier. Right, this is a front loader. So let me just quickly show you the front loading machine. So I'll just, in fact, I only need to show you the bobbin bit really, don't I? Okay, so if I open it down here, this little door, and then inside there's a bobbin case. I'm going to pull it out and I can show you that in a bit more detail. Ooh. Had a bobbin in it. So the bobbin case looks like this. There's a little handle on it here that you pull out, and that's how you grip hold of it. So the first thing you need to do is drop your bobbin into that case. So what you do is you turn it over, you drop your bobbin in, and this time, annoyingly, it's better if when you've got it in and you pull your thread that the bobbin goes around clockwise rather than the anti-clockwise for in the top loaders. So pull it and then just check it's going round clockwise, and then you'll see a little nick in the side of, oh, actually, first thing to say is that bobbin can fall out quite easily, but very cleverly, if you pull back, once you've got the bobbin in, if you pull back on that handle again on the other side, it locks the bobbin into the bobbin case. So it's quite handy once it's in, just to pull that little handle out and hold it that way, because it means then that your bobbin can't go anywhere. If you look round on the side top edge of that bobbin case, you'll see a little nick. It's in there on this one. You want to pull the thread through that little nick and then underneath the plate on the side until the thread comes out of that hole, that hole on the side there. So I put the thread through that little nick there, and then I pulled it underneath the plate until it came out of that side bit there. There we go. And then when you pull it now, it's locked in place because I'm holding the handle. And if I pull the thread through, it glides nice and smoothly clockwise through the bobbin holder. So you need to keep that handle held out like this. And then that little prong there needs to face north. And you pop it back into your machine. And you'll see that there's a hole up here that little prong sits into. And there's also a bar in the center that needs to sit in the middle of your bobbin. So I'm going to push it in. There we go. It's nice and in place. And there, that's it. And then what you need to do then is exactly the same as step 2 that I just showed you with the top loading machine. Hold onto the spool thread, nice with a bit of tension with your left hand. Bring the wheel towards you and pick up the bobbin thread with your spool thread. Okay, and again, just have a bit of a practice and a bit of a play, and before you know it, even if you don't think it now, you will be absolutely fine. Right, and if you do ever have any problems or questions, you can always ask me. And actually, to be honest, the team at Crafting Outlet and Singer Outlet are also amazing, and I'm sure they will also answer any questions that you've got as well. Right, I need to quickly thread this back up. Do you know what? Let's do it together again so that you can just see me doing it one more time. So I'm going to pop the spool thread up here onto the prong. I'm going to go left underneath this little first hook, immediately down, back up underneath that tension dial. I've got no prongy arm bit up here, so I'm going to bring the balance wheel towards me until I can see that appear at the top. This one doesn't come very prominently out actually, but some of them you can actually see. So keep your eye open. Right, I'm going to I've put my thread all the way to the back of there, around that metal arm and back down again. It's really important that you catch it around there actually. Quite often, in fact, sometimes when you're sewing and suddenly it starts to go all loopy, that can be one of the things that's happened, especially if you're sewing quite quickly. The thread has come away from that metal, from underneath that metal bit up there. So always double check if your stitching goes a bit loopy that it's still underneath that. And if not, just unthread, thread up again and make sure that you catch it under there. Okay, right. So that's that. And then, oh, I don't need a bobbin holder. I've got my top loader. So I'm just going to get my bobbin, make sure, I'm going to wind it back up again. I've lost a bit of thread. Make sure that when we pop it and we pull the thread that it's going to go in an anti-clockwise direction, drop it into that bit there. And then let's just thread the needle, and then we can collect the bobbin thread again so that it is joined up, ready to start sewing. Okay, so I'm going to hold with my left hand, bring the wheel towards me. There we go. We've got the loop appearing. So now I've got my bobbin thread up with my spool thread. Right, pop the case on, ready to go. Okay, so set your machines. I'm going to work on the basis that some of you may be sewing along, but you're probably going to be doing this in your own time afterwards. So turn your machine on, you want to set it to straight stitch. So you should see a nice straight line. With this sewing machine, it's number 1. So I've just selected number 1. You might have a straight stitch, which is off center, and one that is on the center. You want to select the one where it's got your straight line of stitching down the center. So pick that one. And then you should be able to choose the length of your stitch as well. When you're starting out, it's quite nice to have slightly longer stitch, because it just means that if you need to unpick it, it's much easier to unpick. So you might want to set it to sort of a 3 rather than a 2.5, which is kind of the standard stitch length. So I've done that here. And then we're ready to do a little bit of practice sewing. So if you take a piece of fabric, it's always better to do a practice sewing piece through 2 layers, because it just mimics your sewing much more realistically. It's very infrequent that you're just going to be sewing through 1 layer of fabric. So have 2 layers of fabric. You don't need to have a very large piece. And what I'm going to do is just do a line down here, first of all. So I'm going to pop the fabric, and I'm not worrying about seam allowance at the moment. I'm just going to pop the fabric underneath my presser foot. I've got a nice long tail in my thread, so I know it's not going to come unthreaded. Pop it under my presser foot, and then there is a lever in the center here that you can lift down and lower down and lift up, which lowers and lifts your presser foot. It's worth noting, actually, if you're ever sewing and you have loads of thick layers of fabric, you can always lift your presser foot up higher just by lifting a little bit higher than it automatically goes. And that will help, that will lift up your presser foot even higher than it does naturally. But we want to lower it down. You must always, always, always make sure that you sew with your presser foot lowered down. If you don't, then you'll get into all sorts of trouble and you'll start knotting your, it will all sort of get knotted up. Then do you remember, I always start off my first couple of, so we've got presser foot down, we're all good. Do my first couple of stitches manually with the wheel. So I'm just going to hold my fabric with, I would normally be sitting straight on, but obviously I'm showing you today. So I'm going to hold my fabric with my left hand and with my right hand, slowly bring the wheel towards me and just do a couple of stitches so that it's like, okay, we know what we're doing, we know where we're going, we're all happy. And then once you're happy with that, you can just gently put your foot down on the pedal and it will start sewing for you. Oop. Oh, it's so nice to have that speed control, because it just means it's not going to go zooming off in the wrong direction. It's really great. I don't know if you remember me saying to do a little bit of reverse stitching at the very beginning and at the very end. So I'm going to hold my finger down on this reverse button and again put my foot down on the pedal. And now we're doing a couple of stitches, literally 3 or 4 stitches is ample, back over the stitches that we've just done to tie a knot. And then we can go. So bring you back in a bit closer, and I'm just holding with a couple of hands, and I'm not forcing the fabric through at all. I'm just kind of guiding and steering it, really. So you don't want to be pulling or pushing your fabric through the machine. You really just want to be steering it, because those the feed dog underneath, those teeth that I showed you, they're really doing all the work with the presser foot of pulling the fabric through the machine. You're responsible for going left and right, really. So there we go. I'm going to put the speed up a little bit. I'm going to do a straight line. And then let's say we want to do a corner. Okay. So when you do a corner, you basically pivot your fabric on the needle. Some of you may have a little button that looks like this, which when you press it, it means that you end either with your needle down in your fabric or your needle up out of your fabric. It's really handy if you've got one of those, because it means that it can do that job for you. So at the moment, over on my screen over here, that button has been pressed. So it means that whenever I stop any line of sewing, my needle is automatically going to end down in my fabric like it has now. If you don't have that button, what you need to do is help your machine along and either put your needle down or up, depending on what you want to do. So if you want to turn a corner and your needle is not down in your fabric, bring the flywheel, the balance wheel towards you until the needle is down in the fabric, like this one here. And then you can just raise up the presser foot with this lever on the inside, pivot your fabric around. And then when you're facing the direction that you'd like to go in next, lower it back down and then just do a bit more sewing. Do one more corner. And then let's say we want to do a curve. And to do a curve, you literally just guide your sewing around yourself in the curve, whatever direction you want to go in. So that's, you'll usually have a kind of the edge of your fabric that you can follow. But if you're doing a really tight curve, you might want to just kind of slowly go around like this, use the wheel and kind of pivot as you go to make sure that you're following a nice tight curvy line. So what I would recommend is have a bit of a play and a bit of a practice, just sew various different lines on scraps of fabric to get the feel for it. Do some curves, do some corners, and make sure that you have a bit of a practice with some reversing as well. When you have finished any line of stitching, you need to make sure, of course, that the needle is not down in the fabric like this, but it's out of the fabric. So if you've got one of these buttons, it's very simple. You can just press that button and the needle will come up for you. If you don't have that button, or you've got a mechanical machine, you just need to bring the wheel towards you until the needle is in the uppermost position. And actually, that's a really interesting point to note, because if you are doing it manually and your needle isn't quite at the top, you might find that when you pull your fabric out, your machine is still kind of part way through doing a stitch and there are quite a few threads underneath still. And that's because it's just not quite finished doing a stitch yet. So it's still busy under there. But as long as you always make sure that your needle is in the uppermost position when you finish a piece of sewing, either with this button or with the wheel, then that shouldn't happen. Okay, so we finished our sewing. Let's just do a little bit of reverse actually. Or did I do that anyway? I can't remember. Let's just do a piece just for fun. So 3 or 4 stitches is ample for reverse. And then needle up, and then you just raise up that lever in here to lift the presser foot up, and then you can pull your threads out, and you've probably got a little thread cutter on the side here, which I can't see. I'm just doing blindly. There we go. Or you can just use your embroidery scissors to snip your thread. Pull a nice long tail of thread out again, ready for your next line of stitching. And there we go. Okay, practice stitching done. We did loads then. Oh gosh. Now all that's left to do, oh, we're doing well for time. Okay, I might pause quickly before we do the sewing of the cushion cover, which is quick. You'll be very surprised at how quickly you can make one, just to see if there are any questions at this point which are going to be really useful to everybody for me to answer. So bye Hazel, thank you for coming. Reverse, about 3 or 4 stitches. When I was doing the thread, it did a couple of stitches on a piece of paper. Stitches look nice and there was an oily stain on your side. Yeah, so that, yeah, it might, I would just do a little bit more sewing on a scrap piece of fabric, Kate, because it might just be that it's brand new, because it will have been beautifully, meticulously maintained, like, you know, serviced before you got it. So I just do a little bit more stitching probably on a scrap of fabric to make sure that that goes. If the bobbin and thread is put in the wrong direction, does that have an effect on sewing? Not necessarily. So for the top loader, you want to definitely make sure it's going in the direction that I explained to you. For a front loader, it actually won't have too much of a difference, but the techniques that I'm just telling you are the techniques that will minimize anything going wrong. So it means that if you put it in that way, so that when you pull it, the bobbin goes clockwise, it's just the smooth, that your machine will be very happy with you and it will thank you. And it means that it minimizes problems happening. I did change the foot very quickly, Sean and Jan, you're right. There might be slightly different ways for you to do this. I'll show you how I do it on this machine, because most of them should be the same. Here we go. So can you see here behind the, so this is the presser foot. Behind the presser foot, there's this little black kind of button. I'm going to press the button, and then by doing that, my presser foot here drops down. And that's because when you press this button, it opens and closes. Well, it opens a little claw inside that that kind of N actually shaped opening in this bit of metal here, the kind of presser foot holder. And so if you look on the presser foot, that claw is holding on to this metal bar that goes across here. So if I place that metal bar into that kind of N-shaped gap and I push it up and then press that again, you can see that that claw opens up again and clips on to the presser foot in the little holder there. That should be the same for the vast majority of your sewing machines. I think pretty much all the sewing machines I've got, and I do have quite a few different ones. That's for kind of standard presser feet, that's the way you do it. Okay. When we're doing the thread on bobbin, it goes under. Can you tell me why during filling thread on bobbin, it goes under the bobbin stand? Okay, I think, Samira, I think you mean, okay, when you're winding the bobbin at the beginning from your spool onto your bobbin, actually I do, yeah, okay, I think I know what you've asked. So you put your bobbin down on here and you push it over to the right, and then obviously push your pedal down, and that's what winds the thread onto the bobbin. You need to make sure that you push the bobbin down really securely onto this prong here that holds the bobbin. If it's slightly higher, then the thread could go underneath the bobbin straight onto the bar, and that's a really annoying nightmare and a mess. So you always need to make sure that when you put the bobbin onto this one here, you push it all the way down. And to be honest, keep your eye on it. So as you're putting your foot onto the pedal and the thread is winding onto the bobbin, just make sure, keep your eye on it and make sure that it's filling that bobbin up as you want it to, and that nothing's going wrong. I think that's answered your question. Saffron, right, this is the last one I'm going to answer before we do the cushions. I think we're still good for time. Do you start sewing before the needle hits the material? Seems to be a gap. No, so the sewing starts right at the beginning of, so the sewing doesn't start until the needle hits the material. So if you want to sew, I think I'm going to answer your question quickly. So if you want to sew right from the very top of your fabric, for example, you want to sew right from here, what I would do is I would start sewing just maybe like a centimetre down, do a couple of stitches, reverse back to the very edge, and then go, rather than trying to get that first stitch right at the very beginning of your thread. Hopefully that of your fabric. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, we're going to quickly make a oh, someone else is coming. We're going to quickly make a cushion cover. You're going to love this. It's one of the most satisfying and wonderful projects. You'll feel so delighted with yourselves when you've done this. They make wonderful gifts. You can add things like pom-poms, applique, whatever you want. I love it. Okay. Now, we've already done the pinning for the first two hems, which was really helpful. So the first hems that we're going to stitch are these ones that we've already pinned. So the two short edges of this long piece of fabric. So normally you would sew with a seam allowance measured from the outside edge of your fabric. So you'd have those little lines underneath on that plate, underneath your presser foot. You would line this outer edge of the fabric. So you always have the bulk of the fabric to your left, by the way. Imagine you were making like a pair of curtains or something. You had loads of fabric. You wouldn't be able to fit all of that fabric into this gap here. So you always have the bulk of the fabric to the left-hand side in this you know, just in space. So usually when you're stitching, you would measure your seam allowance using that little plate underneath the presser foot. So you would have your presser foot on here and you would line up the right hand edge of the fabric with the 1.5 line, or whatever it is, because it's usually a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. But for this project, I want the stitching to be consistent with this inner fold of our hem here. So instead, and quite often, rather than using that plate and those lines, I just match up my edges with the edges of the presser foot. So what we're going to do, and I'll show you again when I put the fabric under my machine, is I'm going to keep this inner fold here of the presser foot lined up with, so inner fold of the fabric, lined up with the left-hand side of the presser foot. I've put all this really clearly in your handout if it's not entirely making sense, but I reckon that bit makes sense. I think you're all good. Okay, right, so let me take you down to my sewing machine. Okay, so I'm going to put my fabric underneath my presser foot, and like I said, so make sure we've got nice long tails on our thread, remember, whoop, pull it all the way out like this, and then put the fabric underneath the presser foot and line up that left hand side of that fold with the left hand side of the presser foot. So like I said just now as well, you don't need to start right at the very beginning of the fabric. Let's start like a centimetre or so in, because we can always reverse back to the beginning. That's all fine. There we go. And we can take out that first pin now, because that first pin is little just before, where's my pin cushion gone? Don't know. That's a bit annoying. Oh, there it is. There we go. So take out that first pin, and then, so let's do the first stitches manually. So get your wheel, bring it towards you a couple of times. Do your first couple of stitches, make sure that there's no funny clunks and everybody's happy. And then let's reverse back to the beginning of the fabric so that our stitching starts right at the start of the fabric. So press on the reverse button and then put your foot down, and you can go all the way back to the beginning. When you've gone back to the beginning, it's only about a centimetre, about 4 stitches, you're off. Now, don't judge my straight line of my stitching here, because I am definitely not sitting straight onto my sewing machine because I'm trying to show you. But what we want to try and do is guide, oh golly, I'm already going off course. Just bear with. So guide our fabric left and right so that your left-hand side of your presser foot stays in line with that left-hand side of that fold. Just before you get to a pin, you can pull it out and then keep going. And I'm going to sped up a little bit just so that we get everything done. You go all the way down just before you get to a pin, take it out. So as you can see, it's really simple just to take the pins out just before you get to them. Oop. There we go. And then when you get to the bottom, which we're nearly there. Oh golly, I am not keeping in line. Sorry, I'm just sitting a bit skew with, which is actually really important. I would always advise that you sit nice and straight onto your sewing machine. You're nice and comfortable, your feet can go flat on the ground. So not like this, but just, I've been sewing for a very long time. So, you know, right. And then when we get to the end, you can stop. And again, we want to make sure that our stitching is secured. So we want to tie a knot, and we do that by pressing reverse and doing 3 or 4 stitches backwards. And then we're done. And then at the end, if you remember, we need the needle to be up. So you can either press the button or bring the wheel towards you manually until the needle is in the uppermost position. Lift up this lever to raise the presser foot, and then you can just pull your fabric out to the left. And I always like to stitch snip my threads nice and close to my stitching, so it's nice and neat on here. What you can do as well at this point is snip It's really good practice to snip your long tails of thread as you go, because it just means that everything's nice and neat. Okay, so we've done one of the short edges of short edge hems. A really wonky line for me. Yours will all be much neater than mine because you're actually sitting square to your machine, so that's good. Okay, we're going to do exactly the same again for the other side. So pop the fabric underneath the presser foot, lower the presser foot down, make sure that you've lined up that left-hand edge of the hem with the left-hand side of your presser foot. Nice long tail of thread, and then do a couple of stitches manually with your wheel. We can take out that first pin and then hold down the reverse button, a couple of stitches backwards, and then off you go all the way down to the other end. I wonder if any of you are sewing along. If you are, it would be lovely to see your makes, but I just don't want you to I don't want you to sew under pressure, you know. I want it to be a lovely, relaxing experience. So so you're not rushing to keep up. This is just such a brilliant first project, though, honestly. If you do go on to make one of these straight away, you must share your makes with me on email or social media, because it makes me literally makes my week to see anything that anybody makes from these. Right, when we get to the bottom, we can press reverse, a few stitches backwards. I think you can probably tell it really does become second nature once you've done it a few times. At the end, you want to make sure that your needle is up, so press the button or bring the wheel towards you until the needle is as high as it will go, and then you can lift up this lever, pull your fabric out, and then we'll snip the threads nice and close to our stitching again. There we go. And then I'm just going to do the same as I did before and snip the threads at the very beginning as well, just to keep it all lovely and neat. There we go. Right, so we've only got 2 more lines of stitching to do, and then you've made a cushion cover, which you will be delighted with. Okay, so I think I can do it this way this time. Yeah. Okay, so now you want to lay your fabric out in front of you with the right side facing up. So that's the only not so great thing about me using gingham, is it's very hard for you to tell which is the right side and which is the wrong side. But I'm laying it out in front of me with the left, with the hems that we've just stitched on the left and the right, and the correct side, the pattern side, if you've got a pattern fabric, fabric is facing upwards. You want to take the left hand side and fold it over by 28 centimeters. So if you fold it over to what you think is roughly 28 centimeters, take your tape measure, which I don't think I mentioned, but that's definitely a really important part of your kit, actually, is your tape measure. I like to have a retractable tape measure that's 1.5 meters long, because it's just really handy. It doesn't take up much space, and it's easy, it keeps it nice and neat. And 1.5 meters is good, because you quite often need a nice long one that's longer than a meter. So I folded my fabric over. This is the wrong side of fabric now on this folded bit, when the right side is in here, and I want this fold from the folded edge to the hem that edge of the hem that we've just stitched to be 28 centimeters. Oh man, that was close, so close. Okay, so I'm going to measure it here, nearly. Oh, look. So that is now 28 centimeters. There we go. So I'm going to pop a little pin in there, because I know that that's 28 centimeters, and I'm going to do the same measure again down here at the bottom, to make sure that everything is nice and straight. Again, because it's gingham, it should line up on my with the pattern, the woven check, but you never know. It's always best to check. Brilliant. Okay, that's great. Pop another pin in there. So pop a couple of pins in, but not too close to the edge of the fabric. So these 2 pins I've probably put about 10 to 12 centimeters in from the outer edge of the fabric. Oh, I just need to not done those completely square. Try and make sure that your raw edges along here in a nice straight line as well. Just redo that because mine weren't. There we go, they are now. Okay, so I've got a fold that's gone over like this, and this folded edge bit here is 28 centimeters from folded edge to the edge of the hem that we just stitched. Next, you need to take the, do you know what, I'm going to put another pin in actually because I don't want that to slip. So I've put another pin in that's about more like 8 centimeters in from the edge. Now, take the other short end and fold that one over the top. So you're going to have a bit of an overlap, but you want this distance from this left folded edge to this right folded edge to be 40 centimeters. So I'm just going to measure at the top like this. Oh, a little bit further to go. I reckon it's about, let's just see. There we go. So 40 centimeters. So again, make sure that your top and bottom raw edges are lined up nicely as well. And again, you can put pins down this center bit here, but not too close to the edges. At the moment, we're just putting these pins in to hold the overlaps in place. You can really see how wonky my stitching was now. Sorry. It's just because I promise you, it was just because it's not straight onto my machine. Right, so that's done. And now the two final hems that we need to sew are the open edges down here. So you can see we've got lots of layers of fabric down these open edges. So if I flip it this way, I think it's a bit easier for you to see. Oh, I need to move that one along. Sorry, again, I'm not doing stuff as straight on as I should be. There we go. That's a bit better. So I've flipped my fabric. So now on the left hand and the right hand side, it is the open edges. So the folded edges at the top and the bottom. And we just need to pin and stitch down this left and right hand side. So if you remember from before, I've got the bulk of the fabric to my left, and I'm going to put the pins in with the points facing away from me like this. So I can see there's lots of thready questions coming up. Oh, Jason, thanks, mate. Jason is helping you, I think, with some of your technical questions and product questions, which is so helpful. I will have a little bit more time at the end to answer anything else, but it's really, how are we doing? Oh, yeah, 4 minutes. Perfect. We're going to be all right. So pin on the left-hand side and pin on the right-hand side, and then we're just going to stitch down both of those hems with a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance this time. So let's take the fabric back over to the machine. Here we go. And this time, when we put it underneath, we're going to line up the right hand edge of the fabric with that well here it's 1.5, my 1.5 centimeter line is just here. What you can do if you want to is get a bit of masking tape if you're doing lots of like projects with 1.5 centimeters, and put a little bit of masking tape or like washi tape on here to mark that 1.5 centimeter line. Or actually there's an amazing little gauge that you can get as well, which I'm pretty sure they sell. I'll save that for another day. I'll do a little separate workshop thing on that, but it's quite handy because it's sometimes a bit hard to keep track of this little line that says 1.5 on it. Anyway, we're going to line it up. Pop the press foot down, take out the first pin, and first couple of stitches, make sure you've got a nice long tail of thread. First couple of stitches with the wheel, and then off you go. Backwards first of all, just over your stitching. And then you can sew all the way down to the bottom. I'm going to try really hard to keep a nice straight line this time. Oh gosh. You've got a few layers of fabric in the middle to go through here. So I would suggest that you stop just before you get to this bit here, and just make sure that you're, with your needle down, lift the presser foot up again, just check that everything is kind of tucked under the presser foot and it's nice and straight, and then carry on your merry way all the way down to the bottom. Oops, there we go. Quick reverse, needle up, and trim. And then finally, on the exactly the same as what you've just done, but down the other edge. So I'm going to line up with my 1.5 centimeter line. I can take that first pin out, nice long tail of thread, do a couple of stitches manually, and then you can go reverse, and then off you go. Just take those pins out as you go. Oh, this time, look, I'm going to have to really make sure that that's in position before I get there. So let's stop just before we get to that bit, needle down, just again, double check that that flappy bit is in place under your presser foot. And then you can carry on down to the bottom, taking those pins out before you go. You'll really find it much easier as well, because you've got quite a few layers of fabric to sew through at those folds, you know, the overlap places. So it's another reason why, just if you use a nice medium weight cotton or something like that for this project, then you'll really thank yourself later on. Okay, we're good. We're good. Machine off. Thank you, brother. We're done. So all that I'm going to show you now is I'm going to turn this right side out, and I'm going to open up the chat for, oh my gosh, it's bang on. It's bang on 1:30. Oh, Andrea, you just made a cushion cover. Woohoo! Well done. And well done anybody else who has done as well. Let me quickly turn it out the right way and so I can show you. Please put any other questions in the chat. Whilst you're thinking of those or writing them, I just need to tell you some other bits. So I'm going to send the recording to you as soon as I can this evening. I've also got the handout, the kind of, it's more than a handout, it's like kind of a workbook that I'll send you with pretty much everything that I've said in it as well. It's got lots of diagrams for all the sewing, so you can work through again in your own time. Oh gosh, look, here we go. A cushion cover, an envelope cushion cover. If you want to, you can add a bit of Velcro or something on here. I've also put a link to my other workshops. So I've got lots of other things that I can I would love to teach you. So I've got a few simple dressmaking ones. I've got how to make pajama shorts, actually, one of my favorites. You can tell I love mustard gingham. Well, mustard anyway. I've got like a summer dress. I've got a zip workshop where I'll teach you how to make a little bag. I've got a patchwork workshop. I've got like a sewing machine maintenance one. So have a look on there. And I've also set you up a little discount code. So if you would like to book on any of the other workshops, look out for my discount code, because you can use that and get a little cheeky discount. If you have any other questions, please feel free to email me, and I would love to see your makes. It always makes me so happy to see them. So please send me photographs, tag me online, do whatever you fancy, and share them with me, because honestly, you really make my day. And the other thing is, if there's anything in particular, I've got a Roman blinds workshop on there as well. If there's anything else in particular that you'd really like to learn and you'd like me to put a workshop on for, pop it in the chat now, or you can email me and let me know, because it's really, really handy for me to know what you guys would like to learn. And I would love to help you. So yeah, please let me know and I'll get back to you. Right, I don't think there are any other questions. I hope you've all had a lovely time. I've thoroughly enjoyed teaching you. Yes, Sharon, I am on Facebook. I will put my Facebook on the email address. Yep, I've got a dress workshop, which is not fitted actually, but I do have a fitted one as well, so I'll put that on for you. Oh, thank you. I'm so pleased. It seems that you've all enjoyed yourself. So that's really brilliant. Thank you so much for coming and for, engaging and showing me your faces and asking questions. It's absolutely brilliant. No, not necessary to purchase a dress form, but you definitely can, because it will make your life easier and it will mean that it fits you really nicely. Great. Thanks, guys. Darts. Okay. Keep putting your, what you'd like to learn in, because it's really handy for me. And then if I close this down and you've not put it in, just send me back an email in reply to the email that I send you tonight. It takes me about probably half an hour to download the video and then send it to you, but I will send it this evening. Thanks, guys. Thank you so much. Good luck. I'm here for you. You're going to be sewing stuff before you know it. Can't wait to see it all. And yeah, thank you. Cheerio. Bye-bye. Lots of love.